Hello everyone, a warm welcome to join the Cybersecurity Talks. Today we are joined by Mr. Arumugam Palani, Director of Software Engineering at Salesforce, and we have Mr. Prem Kumar, CIO and CISO at EH Technologies. Hello Arumugam. Hello Prem Kumar. Welcome to our show.
Hi Vijay, thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. It's again wonderful to talk to you folks and on important topics. So I'm happy to be here.
Hi Vijay, hi Arumugam. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us
Hi,
today.
Prem.
Today we are going to talk on Data Foundation, DPDP, GDPR way. Let's dive into the discussion. Arugam, this is to you. What does the term data foundation encompass and why is it crucial in today's digital landscape?
Sure. So, as in the previous session, I was talking about is the way the computers and the internet, then followed by the mobile and the cloud. These paradigms have ensured that we are always with internet, with these systems, and we are also generating lots and lots of data. In fact, per day, petabytes of data. Especially the commerce side of it, where e-commerce like Amazon, Flipkarts, or the other like Google, the searches or the workspaces, like any internet scale that we are able to generate this data. Now, along with that, what is happening is again, last 1.5 years, we'd have heard about the Gen AI and the LLMs coming along and trying to show our intelligence in a different way, right? So essentially, these are all powered by the data. So just taking a one step back, we were also taking the previous amount of data and using it for reporting, analytics, and also we were doing some predictive AI. But what is important now of all this is coming in is this whole thing called the privacy, security, and how do we ensure a trusted aspects that we can bring in here so that these intelligence is used in a right way and at the same time our data is also being protected. So in order to make this happen, what I mean by a data foundation is all about is in the past to sort out the chain, the growth, the digital growth that was happening, we could have sorted out and brought some different systems, right? It could be web application, it could be mobile app, it could be any internal systems like ERPs and or it could be some sort of the CRMs and services, CRMs and marketing clouds, whichever, right? All of this data is coming along and sitting there. And if I add one more dimension that also really representing real world entities, like it could be you and me, right? Or anybody in this world where if I'm opening an account in a bank or we're taking any loan, we have to provide our own details, especially in Indian context, we'll be providing an identity like Aadhaar, PAN, or any other information for that matter, right? So in the transactional systems, what I'm saying about those systems, we could have taken this data and placed it one way, right? Only placing only that application in mind. But the proliferation of data oriented applications like my analytics or predictive AI or the Gen AI, the recent aspects that are coming in, those foundations have to be really solid in terms of aligning with the personal interest, that is a privacy, security, and above all, how do we bring in this trust aspect of it, which means customers would love to understand how my data is safer with a service provider, such that that confidence that brings with the data protection aspects, that will make a business solid and flourish in the future. That's where these data foundations are very crucial, and that's where going forward.
Can you explain the core principles of DPDP, data protection and data privacy.
Fair. So now that we have Prem in the line, so Prem, could you help us from your point of view how the GDPR and DPDP helps us? So how these things are getting evolved over a period of time?
Sure. Arumugam. So when you say data privacy, major thing is whole our world is talking about how the confidential data that is there has to be collected, processed. How it is collected is the primary thing, and how data is important for the organizations. Now, without data, we are not doing anything at the moment, right? So
Right.
everything revolves around data, and data collection. When we talk about privacy part, how the data is collected, for what purpose it is collected, and how it is getting processed. What are the required document? Is it collected with a minimal set, or it is not connected with a minimal set? That's the major part that is talking. When you talk about GDPR or DPDP, the pointer is how much of data has to be collected is the first point that is coming up. Now, in India, if you really look at, we have multiple apps, we have multiple platforms we connect. We are on mobile, same account. We are on the laptop, same account. We are on connected those to our smart TVs, same accounts. So there are so many things with one mail ID which is getting populated all as data. Now, what is the purpose of this
Yeah.
data collected? Everybody is asking a consent for collection of data. Now, consent is one pointer that is coming up in privacy part is how this data has to be used. You cannot collect data and use it. Once I see example, we'll take the mobile SIM card is an example. Now, if you take a mobile SIM card, earlier what they used to say, you give me your Aadhaar card, you give me your PAN card.
Yeah.
They used to collect so many documents. Again, coming to loans, do you need so many documents to be collected? What is the requirement?
Yes.
That is what data foundations per se we are going to talk about, and where is that data going and storing, why is it collected, what happens to data after certain point of data being collected. Now, what is the foundation that has to be placed for collection of data? Now, if you have to collect data for a SIM card, what is that you minimal it? Your address, your you don't need a bank account detail, but they'll ask you for a bank account detail. Can you give
Your
that?
identity.
That is not required. So for a loan, they may ask you to show 6 months transaction. That is required. Now for another,
Correct.
for a SIM card, you don't need that banking details. You need your address and verification ID, which either one can be okay, either an Aadhaar card or your PAN card. Now they'll collect an Aadhaar card and PAN card also, which is not required. So now Aadhaar and PAN are linked. Now if I take Aadhaar, will it
Hmm.
be sufficient? These are the norms that which government is saying how much of data has to be taken, for what purpose, what is the duration this data is being collected, and how long will it be kept. When is it, once the process is done, do you have that document to be used for other purposes? How much duration this data is kept on what mode, whether it is archived, whether it is backed up for some period, then archived, then deleted. What is the period? When will you delete it? Those things are what these GDPR and DPDP acts are trying to tell us. So it is about collection of data, processing of data, storage of data, and deletion of data. These are the four aspects any
Yeah.
on the privacy data collection that is to be taken into consideration. Which I hope I answered your
Thanks,
question,
Prem.
Armugam sir.
Yes. Thank you, Prem.
Yeah.
You
Thanks.
you mentioned that government has some guidelines and how long it has to be kept. All this. So same way, I believe the organizations also have certain policies, right? In that context, if I ask you, how do organizations establish a strong foundations, for data protection within their operations? How do they engage, ensure this?
The organizations have to put a policy with what guidelines of the government is going to bring up. These guidelines will have to be taken into consideration because the DPDP Act is already in place. They are saying you will have to have a deep data processing officer, a collector to look at that. You have various roles that are there assigned as part of the new law that is there, especially in our government cases. How that data, see, in an organization we have lots of data. You have every kind of data. You have a passport detail of the organization for visa purposes. Then you have Aadhaar card for their identity purposes. Then you have their PAN card
identity. Yeah.
details for their financial details. Then you have their residential data, which is location again. Then you have their mobile number, which is again sensitive. You have their bank account details, which is again sensitive. So these are pointers of data foundations that has to be looked at, and these laws are very critical for data collection. Now, if you go to GDPR, you will have to say where is the data stored, whether it is stored in this
Mm.
country or which country, can I port it? Okay, those laws come in when you go to GDPR, right? Every organization or every country is come up with this laws nowadays. You have CCPA, you have Brazil's LDPQ, I think. Then you have HIPAA for medical records. Lot
Yeah.
of regulations which are coming up for every kind of data collection, processing, and stuff.
Yeah. So, Vijay, I would like to add a few pointers. What Prem alluded, and a very important point, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, I want to also club how technically some people can approach. So, let me explain a little bit more. So, GDPR, DPDP, or the country-specific laws are talking about, in general, about a data that is especially related to living being. As Prem was mentioning, it's about your name, your email, your address, your some of these government IDs, and what else, right? That can uniquely identify the person. That short term is PII, personal identifiable information, right? So that is a first level. And the second level is there are about industry specific. For example, in banking, like RBI as an major body, they will talk about this is a right way to keep the data privacy. Similarly, if you take a healthcare industry would talk about, okay, there is a PHI, that individual ID number, and their individual records about, especially the diagnosis records or any the treatment related records. So all these records have to be kept in a very, very secure place. And that's where industry specific laws have to be embedded on top of it. And the third one is about the life cycle aspect, which briefly about the collection, processing, storing, and then how do we eventually we sunset the data, or how do we come out the data, right? So of all this, the some things where there are different parties involved. In this case, there is a data the provider, which is nothing but end user, the data keeping. There are nice names in GDPR parlance and DPDP. I'm just simplifying it here. There's a data custodians and what data is kept there, and how this data can be shared with the consent aspect of the customer or the end user, and then also the life cycle aspect. Like after a few years, I can clearly say a law says after X number of months, my data has to be removed. That's a default I should support. Otherwise, industry specific data, I have to keep it. That whichever is best option, we can pick it. So, of all this life cycle, let me take one step down. What are the technical design principles and systems should be in place so that it helps, especially the organizations either are already in journey, more or less. Companies will have one or the other form of a data with them, right? With some databases and somewhere, or anybody newly branching into it. So I want to spend a couple of minutes there. Is so when you're picking the data, the first thing, foremost thing, as Prem was mentioning, is from the design phase itself, we have to clearly mark it as which of them are PIA information, right? That's the first thing, known aspect we can build in. From there, at the minimum, what we can look at is this whole data, how it's going to flow from where, like where it is getting originated and where it is going to be stored. Ideally, as I said, because of the laws, it has to be within the country, which means my data store, either it could be an RDBMS or a NoSQL DB in technical parlance, that can reside within India. If you are a private data center, you will have within a country. If it is a public cloud, better to keep the available the instances and available zones, availability zones accordingly to keep that data, right? So that's where from the data design itself we know that where the data is originating and how it's going to be stored, right? That's the first guideline I can think of it. Part two, when the data is coming along, this is again, there is InfoSec and other policy, other certifications already talk about this, is data when it starts, it has to be encrypted, data in flight or data in motion. That's one. Second one, the data we pick it up and how do we keep it in the DB in the form of an encrypted data. So there are again some guidelines where should we encrypt the whole DB or should I encrypt these sensitive information, which means there should be a data management aspects coming in between, which data management followed by the data governance and then data management, they come together to codify these roles into the organization such that when the data is entering, these systems take care of encrypting at a right pace. Right, that's the second part. Also, there is another way. If data encryption, decryption, obviously you need to maintain those encryption keys, and you have to recycle them. And a bunch of things are coming in. So, where from an operational perspective, we can also use data masking, right, where you can do some redaction or whichever the possible way, so that whenever the data is getting read, you are not giving the actual data, but at the same time you are enabling those data based operations, right? That's one. And the last one is the one of the key is about how the data recycle or the deletion can happen is based on the data governance, which is aligned to the policies I was talking about in the beginning. Those can be codified such that at regular intervals, this data either can be archived in a right fashion or it can be deleted. Either it could be mass delete or it could be a specific deletions. And all this can come based on the law or to part of a consent of the customer. So in order to do all this, also if you are not to all this, which is there is an underlying thinking that this is an application somebody is developing and they are able to maintain, and this is where going to happen. This is all the things you need to follow. There is another dimension where we do use what you call software as a service applications, like for example, Salesforce, Workday, or Ariba, some of those applications, right? What happens is you use them as a web service. We create our data inside those systems and what to be done. Where all these providers, for example, what we have is in Salesforce, we do have a data encryption, right? People can take something called Shield, which helps in terms of making this data encryption and decryptions very straightforward. And also there is about masking and bunch of other things are in place, right? For what I'm trying to say is this SaaS applications, they already provide this kind of a features either out of the box or we may have to go and configure it. So by doing that, these features are available out of the box and we can just make ourselves compliant to these the important data privacy laws.
To add,
Thank you
Ramesh,
for that.
to add to what Arumugam was saying, data has to be very particularly when it comes to organizations part. What the organizations have to have, they'll have to have personal data protection and security to be done. That is very very important.
Yeah.
How they'll have to say what is the consent that they are taking. Okay, consent management is one pointer where the data foundations has to be very clear. uh, how long is the consent going to be, is the consent duration also has to be said, whether after this is
Mm.
done there should be a pointer where they get to know saying that my data is being processed and later it is going to be deleted or it is getting deleted, your data has been processed and this the purpose of the data that was collected is over and we are deleting the data. That's one more way you take. Then how the individual also has to look at what kind of data is shared and when did it share. That becomes a responsibility of the individual also when it comes to privacy operations, because your data has to be secured by yourself at a larger extent, right? That's where you will have to look at taking a consent. Then you will have to say what are the rights that they have on the data. That also you can say. Then you can list out the duties also, what each of the data element that has to be used can be taken into consideration, right? So that way, yes, there are pointers that organizations and individuals have to look at for the data to be taken under provisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that. If I talk about the opportunities, I mean, challenges and opportunities for the businesses, what challenges do businesses face in implementing and maintaining a robust data protection framework under GDPR?
Sure. So, Vijay, there are, as I said, right, I'll call it out this problem solving in a three-way. One is about the past data, right? I do have some past data. How do I handle? So, it is like this. I already started generating the data, and now I got a policy, right? So, how do I ensure that that policy is serving my customers in their best interest from a compliance point of view, from a data privacy, and at the same time, how do I also enable the compliant of my past data? Right? That's the one dimension. Two, the new data that is getting created, how best we can ensure that we are also compliant with respect to that. Three, any future needs in terms of whatever currently we are doing. If we want to, for some reason, we want to undo it and redo with something else, what are the right ways to do? Right? These are the three dimensions I will look at it. And the tool selection also we can bring in the same fashion, such that, for example, uh, like say encryption, right? If I do one kind of encryption key and then move ahead and then go ahead and encrypt and use the same key to decrypt, from infosec point of view, keeping a one key for a long period of time is not good, right? Because it may
Yes.
get into a breach issue. So what we do is we will ask them, why don't you like say cycle your keys, in the sense that you change your keys and make the again this data is getting decrypted and encrypted again, right? That's one of the key guideline, right? They have to come together, right? Privacy and the security, they all come together, right? So that operationally, if you look at it, I need to get a tooling in such a way that I will be flexible enough to have this data be done. I can invoke this so that these operations can happen in the background, and such that I'll get a report for becoming compliant. Right. This is an example. That's what I said. In the past data, when I'm dealing with it, this is something I have to really understand. The current data that is going on is similarly, especially these applications that are the front facing to bring this data, they also should have this kind of a setup done it in the form of a direct way that according to the data policy, our data internal policy, this is termed as a PII information. That means when somebody is coding, that is a time during the security review, what we call shift left, right? So that's where people can review it. Then accordingly, the required the treatment of that in terms of it could be I'll encrypt it from the day one, I'll redact it, whichever the way it works, right? That's the second one. From a future point of view, also keeping these data stores intact, right? For example, I don't need to store all the data that is more than X number of years. Rather, I'll just go ensure that spend some time or one time activity to bring them into a cold storage, such that we know that okay, this particular data, whether it is compliant or not, have a clarity, and then whatever in the remaining data, we can ensure that we can attack that first, sure that making sure this is all in place. So even in future, any new law comes and new compliance has to happen, this process can be repeated such that we can be in a compliant way. So just to help here, I'm taking two types of context. As I mentioned, if I am my own engineering team or the product team who's happening, I'm using any cloud. The cloud, especially the public clouds, have got amazing tools in place, which I'm basically personally I use them. So that's where I can say. In the private, there are tools available, but that could be specific to that context. But here, we can make use of the public clouds to start off, and eventually we can figure it out a better solution. And again, in the SaaS applications, leverage the SaaS application provided solutions, because they themselves are already compliant with these laws, right, in any fashion. So that let's take first stab of it, and if something more to be done, they can extend it further. Yeah.
Again, Vijay, so when you look at data from an organization standpoint, you'll have to bring data in such a fashion that it becomes part of the approach, privacy approach. Now, what is privacy approach? There are two ways that you can bring privacy into enforcement. One is by design. While you are doing a design, ensure that you have the design in place for security also in place
Yes.
for the what kind of data that you are collecting. That becomes crucial for us. Then you can say that we have the approach that we do for collection of data is going to be privacy by design. Then by default, while you make a mandate that without having the compliance or security clearance from the organization, we will not have that tool or the procedure rolled out into production. That has to be tested thoroughly. And that way, there are two approaches, as I said. One is by design, and by one is by default. So, privacy by design and privacy by default.
Difference.
If we talk about opportunities, are there opportunities for organizations to leverage data protection misses as a competitive advantage? What do you see? What is your view?
I would see that's very high level. I mean, that has a lot of opportunity. I think Prem being a CISO, he might have a very broader perspective, but as a technology and engineering product side versus as an end user side, certainly if you look at it, if I'm using a particular app, suppose it's a health records of app, right? I'm more than happy if they can ensure that my data about when I my profile data and my appointments and my diagnostic information and whatnot, if they are able to put that perspective where we follow data privacy laws, all the data is in place and it's very transparent to you, right? That's most important. Transparency is important where look, you can come, you know what we are doing, there are things that are available, and you can manage your consent. That's how we're going to share the data. So that's very much pronounced, right? Then I will be a very sticky customer, right? I will ensure that even if that requires with some premium, like where I have to pay a bit of amount, that should be okay to maintain that aspect, because these are all critical industries like your healthcare and your banking or financial industries and your insurance industries. These are all very important and you can't take a chance. And if I would say, if somebody is already working in that domain, they are like thinking about this privacy compliance and whatnot they want to do, I would say they can increase their exposure or priority on this, and they can start focusing on it. That will indirectly bring more customers, repeat customers, stickiness. Of course, ultimately they can realize their revenue and operational excellence, whichever the way it comes in an indirect way. Prem, your perspective on that front, please.
Agree with you, Arumugam. So, pointer is you'll have to have a secure platform for all the data that is being collected, and organizations have to take responsibility in bringing data to have it secured. It does not get going into the dark web or anywhere, because the organizations have a larger role to play. And if a breach happens with the law coming in, there are hefty fines, and you will be scrutinized for all the data that is being lost, how, what is the procedure, and the audits will be very, very difficult for us to handle.
That's
If you
one
talk
more
about,
perspective. As we said, sorry,
yeah,
go
please go
ahead,
ahead.
Vijay, please.
No, please go ahead. Add your views, please.
Yeah. So as I said, there's a perspective is about it's not only the enabling the customer. As I said, the transparency that we want to build, that show it. That's the key where Prem brought an important point, that what are the safeguards are in place such that my data is really safe and really it has got a privacy laws. Everything is in place is very important. I mean, investing on right set of infra, data infrastructure, overall infra and tooling is very important. And if somebody is developing or showing interest in this, that's also another opportunity that startups can develop these kind of tools so that everybody else can make use of it, and the privacy can be really tight in place.
The startups has to be if there is a startup which is bringing or coming up, there has to be privacy as part of the data protection. What is the limitation that they are having? Lawfulness, fairness, and transparency has to come up. Purpose of the limitation, purpose of what is the data getting collected, how minimized data can be collected is one thing. And there have been issues in terms of accuracy at many places where people say I had given one thing but the data is not accurate, it is got my application is got rejected, example. So those accuracy also has to be looked at from a both organization perspective and the individual perspective. Disable or discard old documents which are there, and keep your say example is a passport verification or given into many people don't look at
Yeah.
their passport has to be renewed, and that has to be given into the organization. Once they are applying for a visa or a travel, they find that their passport is not updated or their passport is not there. So that time the whatever information that is gone is wrong. So that becomes a challenge between the organization and the person who is given the document to keep the records updated. Then again, when we look at data, again, how much of storage that is there, where it is stored, that is to be looked at. Integrity and confidentiality has to be looked at for protection of data. Then who's accountable? That plays a major role. How much are the organization accountable for this?
Absolutely.
How much is the legal authorities accountable for that kind of data? And as an individual, how am I accountable for that data also becomes very crucial for us.
Yep, thank you for that insight. So you mentioned about technology and tools, right? So if I ask about technology and innovation, how has the GDPR influenced the development of new technologies and innovations in data management?
Sure, Vijay. This certainly influenced in multiple angles. For example, the continuing with Prem's point, right? If I'm a new company, I'm going to start now. The first and foremost thing is that I have to be aware of this GDPR or the compliance, the laws that I'm getting into a country, and ensuring that these things are available from the day one, right? The laws, I'm compliant from day one. If I really want to play a long-term game, right? That's the one aspect that's changed. That to create that opportunity or to capitalize on the opportunity, there are a set of other companies who have brought that information. Like again, I go to a security use cases where if you take a mobile, I mean your organization gives an MDM just to ensure that your apps are safe, right? Which means they know the data coming in. Similarly, the DLB applications. Similarly, if you take a cloud, as I said, ensuring that what is the data that is already currently available and how much is the data is gone out of my application or came in that, what is the PII levels or PII information available, and what is the amount of I would say classification done, right? Whether some field is really a PII or whatnot, and then how much is really the system they're already been done with, like say it's encrypted or masked or whichever the one picked by the customers or picked by the policy, right? So to serve all this, these tools are in place. One natively available. If I'm starting new, if I'm doing something today, I will first go and ensure that okay, this is the data. First of all, this is the country, this is the industry, this is the set of privacy laws I want, which means that translates into these product features or what we call it as NFR, non-functional requirements, that we pick it and ensure that whichever the systems, like from the data store, my application, like if you take a modern way of doing is like containers with Kubernetes and the AKS, right? So EKS. And similarly, above my certificates, how good I need to keep those certificates in place. Similarly, my encryption keys. So I'm talking about some of the bread and butter which is used day in, day out. But the core idea is I need to keep this as a checklist with me to ensure that all of these things are in place so that when my first version goes out to the customer, I can confidently say that, look, we have already taken care of the privacy related ones. And we are still growing or we are still continuing to evolve with this, but whatever the basic important things that they required, we are compliant. that gives a very big thumbs up. Like for example, I'm convincing Prem in this case, right? Look, Prem, can you use my application? If he says thumbs up, we go ahead. That's the best thing we can get out of the application, and that gives confidence to uh, I mean, the customers who are going to buy and their customers also, right? That way, we clearly know that the data, the origin of the data, to how it goes into the journey, and then how it settles, and how I'm taking care of as a custodian for that. Prem, you may add if any points, and that will help you.
Right. So now, when we talk about data foundations, you have touched upon that. You will have to look at encryption, data protection, vulnerability management. Then, what are the ways that you look at you collecting of logs again, SIEM? What kind of data is getting collected? Where is it getting stored? How are the patches applied? Whether it will be applied on all the servers at once? How is the data getting backed up? Because all systems get touched when you have
Absolutely.
encryption done or when you have protection done, the encryption decryption keys management, all these are data related stuff. So you will have to look at the policies, principles, and the vulnerability management for each of the application that is there. Encryption plays a major role. Data protection also is the next important thing when we talk about foundations of data management.
Great, Prem.
Yeah, I think you're on mute. Vijay, you're talking on mute.
Sorry, I put on mute. If I thank you for that insights, my next thing is about the data breaches and incident response, right? So if we talk about in the event of data breach, what steps should organizations take take to comply with the GDPR, and how they can mitigate the impact of data?
Arumugam, you would like to take?
Prem, you could talk about from a process point of view. I can
Yeah.
tell about tool point of view what we can take care of. Yeah.
From a process standpoint, we'll have to see data anonymization. One is that. How is
Yeah.
it getting stored? Again, it becomes very important for us to look at organizations taking care of the data that is available or what we have provided is kept secure, integrated, which has integrity and confidentiality availability there. So CAI, confidentiality, integrity, and availability are important pointers there. So integrate. You will have to have that data secured in a format or encrypted mode. That becomes the responsibility of the organization to take care of that. Now, from a technology point, tools point, which I think Armugam can help us on understanding that.
Sure, Prem. So as Prem has mentioned that everything from end to end. In fact, the first thing is the, as I said, the past data, right? What is the entry points of this data, right? Who can access? First is access control. We'll start off with. That could be a direct access, or it could be via application code, whichever for that matter, right? Those keys internally used, access keys and whatnot. Now we need to ensure that there is a regular process, regular the recycling of that keys, right, or the regular updates of those keys in place as part of the process, which is transparent. Where, if possible, there could be another service which can make these things happen, so developers or engineers can go and make that happen. So one is from an access control point of view, those entry points to be tightened, right? There is no more access on that. Just to add a Prem's point, it's only internal I'm talking about. We also can engage with VAPT testing
Okay.
or some ethical hackers, just to ensure that any APIs that were exposed, or any application that is exposed which is operating on APIs, they can obviously have these vectors. They can find out, and we can go and do preventive measures on that. That's very important one.
Again, taking your point, Armugam, is you'll have. it depends on whether you are doing application security management or an infrastructure security
Yeah,
management, right? So
correct.
looking at that way, data again, when it becomes to server availability, that becomes how do you patch. That way, that availability of data or availability of that system becomes critical. Now, from an application
Yeah,
security point, uh, do we need to have that downtime planned based on the upgrades that we do, or how that data is being backed up? What is the cycle of backup of this data for managing that? Is also to be like you touched upon a point where you said retention. What is the period that of retention has to be
correct,
there?
correct.
So again,
Yeah. So,
those pointers have
mhm.
to be looked at, and retention, deletion, processing, again, all comes under the law saying that how is collected. Again, we are going up the same pointers, but
The
when we
same
talk
aspect.
about data, it
Yeah,
comes in a cycle. How is it collected? What is it processed for? How is it stored, and how it is getting destroyed or deleted? So those are the aspects of a foundation
correct.
of data management when it comes to privacy operations is what is becoming crucial for organizations to maintain across multiple applications. You have HRMS, you have then you have financial data, then you have legal and compliance data, then you have confidential data, you have business data, then you have business data is again leads generation data. So what kind of POs are coming? Even uh, masking GDPR and this one DPDP say even having a PO number, customer name, and the amount also is to be looked at. That becomes sensitive data, right? So that's where every data is classified very carefully under the DPDP and the GDPR rules, how it is to be processed. That is where these foundations are placed in keeping all the privacy of whether it is organization assets or individual assets.
Correct. So just to add a one point to you, Prem, as you said, some of the infosec related the best practices that are in place, right? Security, they are the further foundations, right? We need to have them first of all, right? Then on top of it, we have to bring these data systems in place, which are being interfaced by the applications, right? That's where various applications. It could be within ourselves, or it could be hosted in a SaaS or a cloud, right? So from a privacy point of specifically, I would like to add one important point is the data classification and the data management aspects to be a centralized application such that this classification and this metadata, it can be exposed as an API or whichever the access, so that any application who's going through it, they can get a latest classification and latest way of managing such that while writing the data to these data systems, they can take care of this part of it. So that the second part, when the breach happens, especially what we have to do in the sense is we'll just ensure that the data that have whatever happened, we if we have a smaller data that is set up in my system, we can quickly know that how do we, for example, encryption, decryption, or redaction, whichever there, we can keep some tools in place. As I said, cloud-based applications have important tools and others also available, basis which we can quickly redo our stuff. Do I mean again come back to the privacy and keep it in another safe place with respect to the we can take a call, right? If it is a past data, maybe it makes sense to keep it in a really, really cold storage. If it is a real data, since it's a smaller packets are available, like for example, you can use like say partitions, right? We call it as data partition. So we can keep the smaller chunks of data such that we can operate on them and eventually become compliant in due course of time. So maybe a little bit detail here, but the view is infra is there. On top of it, data related management is central tool. And when anything happens, these data foundation related tools can be handy to make process in chunks of data or a bulk of data such that we can turn around quickly, right? Turn around quickly and then ensure that we can bring the confidence of our customers back into normal.
Thank you for the insights, Arumugam and Prem. With this, we would like to conclude the session. My three key takeaways are use data masking, and whenever we provide the consent to any applications, please go through the privacy policy, all the data management policy. We should know, and we should understand how they are using the data. one thing. And second thing is, whenever data breach is happening, we have to be very careful and follow the data management policies as per the organizations and guidance. Thank you for sharing the insights. Thank you, audience, for listening to us, watching this. With this, we would like to conclude the session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks, Prem. This is an interesting conversation. Thank you so much.